Welcome to HarmonyTALK, a podcast about dreamers and doers. Here, people from many different backgrounds talk about their dreams, how they fulfilled them, and the moment they knew there was no turning back. This podcast is sponsored by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. Honored to be hosting this episode, I'm Todd Stephens. My guest today is Dr. Melvyn Wolk, a retired pediatrician and children's advocate. He's practiced medicine in New York City, Texas, and made his home in Scranton, Pennsylvania. As a man known to pursue his many passions, he's also an avid photographer, visual artist, and along with his wife Marilyn, an author of an educational children's book called The Illphabet. Welcome to the program, Dr. Wolk.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you. I have to ask you, what age did you decide you wanted to be a physician?
Well, we can go back to when I was about 5 years old. At that time, I was living in New Britain, Connecticut, and many house calls were made when I was sick at the time, and I admired the physician who took care of me, made house calls, and made me well at the time. My uncle knew him as a friend, and we used to have some good times together, unfortunately, when I was sick.
Oh, goodness gracious. And is that what inspired you to be a pediatrician then?
Not at that time. I think I became more interested in becoming a pediatrician when I was in medical school.
Okay. And what about pediatrics interested you?
Well, the part about pediatrics that I enjoyed was the fact that it was a little bit more challenging, I thought, than adult medicine, because the children could not complain when they're very young, and it was up to you to figure out the puzzlement, so to say, of their illness. And that's what really intrigued me. And besides, I love kids.
Absolutely. Do you consider yourself a kid at heart still?
Absolutely.
You know, looking at your career certainly spanned many decades and thousands of patients. But when I look about what you've done through your career and the history of it, you started a neonatal intensive care unit at the Community Medical Center in Scranton. You started the Ronald McDonald House. The word visionary comes to mind, and I think about the children you helped and the families that you supported. What gave you the inspiration to start those projects?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it has a difficult answer, because how does one get an idea? You suddenly have a need for something, perhaps, and you look around and you see newborn babies who are born prematurely and need care and have to be shipped out to other hospitals for care. Why don't we have something here that we can do for them? So that gave me the idea, we should put in a neonatal center here at Community Medical Center at that time during the 80s. So we put it together with, I had a lot of help with a lot of different people, the nursing staff, finding a neonatologist, making room at the hospital. To make a long story short, it all went together, taking 3 years. Then we were the first neonatal unit in Northeast Pennsylvania, particularly the Scranton area. What goes with a neonatal unit? Well, the parents have to stay somewhere after the infant is admitted to the neonatal unit. So I think a Ronald McDonald House would do very nicely. So that, once again, took a lot of energy, so to say. And I'm very, very thankful that I had Carol and Albert Mueller, who were owners of some of the local McDonald's restaurants. They pitched right in. We found volunteers. We found people interested in being on the board. It really flew very nicely. In the 80s, we had a neonatal unit. It was a grade 3, which is top order. And we also had Ronald McDonald House, which has been exceedingly successful. The people in the Scranton, Wilkes-Barre area have supported it truly very, very nicely.
And how important is it for those young children and their families to be that close during their time of illness?
You should interview them.
Yeah.
You find out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
they just love it.
And they have you to thank for it.
Well, you're welcome.
And the community involvement, you spoke briefly of that. Not only, you're practicing pediatrician at the time, but you're also chief of pediatrics and really a community advocate, because you had to rally that support. You obviously have a talent in doing so. So when you spoke, people listened, apparently.
Well, they did. But the people in the area have a big heart, and that's why everything flew so nicely.
That's wonderful. So you raised your family here in northeastern Pennsylvania, 3 kids, and with your wife, Marilyn. But your journey didn't start here necessarily. Where did your journey begin?
Well, my journey began at birth, I guess. I was born in Brooklyn on February 10th, 1934. As I grew older, my mother always reminded me at the time of my birthday, it was the largest snowfall in Brooklyn at that time. Unfortunately, after birth, my father had passed away when I was 6 months old, and she packed myself up and everything and moved back to her mother and father, my grandparents, which were located in New Britain, Connecticut. We lived in a small tenement type of living, and it was located above a market store. I used to go down there and buy chocolate. I'm a little bit of a chocoholic.
Still today.
Right. We lived there comfortably. It was crowded, but we were comfortable. My mother worked, my grandfather worked, my uncle worked, my aunts worked, and I was home with my grandmother, who gave me anything that I wanted, up until the age 7, when my mother met a new gentleman. They were married, and from there, we moved to Waterbury, Connecticut. He worked at the time, and then went to grammar school there, and went to high school there, and then it was time to pick a college. I was so impressed thinking back to the doctor who took care of me as a child in New Britain, and he went to the University of Vermont for medical school, so I applied there to undergrad school and spent 4 years in undergrad. In my senior year, there was a special program. If you wanted to go to medical school, they would choose 6 undergraduate students and have them do a half year of their 4th year undergrad with the 1st year of medical school. And the next year, you would finish the half of your medical training and half of your senior year that you didn't do the year before. And I was fortunate enough to be able to apply for that and accepted, went through medical school, and that's when I chose that pediatrics. And then went to New York City, to the big city.
The big city,
to
right.
Kobe Hospital, which is part of the Bronx Municipal Hospital, Montefiore, and Albert Einstein School of Medicine, and Yeshiva University. And there I did my internship, my residency, and after that, I went into the Air Force for 2 years so that I wouldn't be drafted. Spent 2 years in San Antonio, Texas at Randolph Air Force Base as chief of pediatrics. Imagine that, pediatrics on an Air Force base. So,
yeah, well, those families on that base, I'm
right,
sure that,
right.
that needed your care.
And I'll just finish the story with where do you go after you do your 2 years stint in the service? Well, we looked at several places around the country, and believe it or not, my wife being from Scranton, I reviewed the situation about Scranton. We chose Scranton, and she schlepped me back to Scranton.
Schlepped you all the way, I'm
right.
sure. Right. Well, if we could just go back, in your childhood, that's humble beginnings. Born in New York City, moved to Waterbury, Connecticut, then practicing pediatrics. What was Mel Wolk like as a kid?
Well, I had a lot of neighborhood kids growing up at that time. Of course, it was mid-late 30s, okay? Yeah. We didn't have the splendid equipment and things like that you have today. Paper bag and a piece of coal in it was fine as a rattle, I guess.
Oh, right, sure.
And played in the ashes in the backyard because we burned coal growing up at my grandmother's place. Had lots of friends in the neighborhood, all different varieties, and we all got along great. Traded comic books. I gave away such wonderful comic books. First Batman, first Superman, oh my God. When I think of those times.
I was going to ask you, what was your favorite superhero back in those days?
Batman.
Batman.
And Batman lives on today.
Absolutely. Boy, timeless. That's for
timeless.
Sure. So you could have spoken with any of your patients at the time about their favorite superheroes as well, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I still delve into it quite a bit.
Wow. Relatability in pediatrics seems to be such a critical piece of it. And, today's practice of medicine, if you have to see patients in so many an hour and those sorts of things, how critical is that in your practice throughout your life, relating with your patients, even though they might be significantly your junior, so to speak?
Well, it was a bit difficult dealing with children at first. You have to get to know them. You have to play with them. You have to be friendly with them and be truthful to parents about their child. You have to talk to them also and make the time, not only for organic illness, say, but make time between the parents and the children to formulate good family relationships. Your family relationships early on depend what you will be as an adult, and that's the important thing.
A wonderful statement. Yeah, the importance of family and developing that young mind,
right,
if you will, those behaviors. If I could bring you back to your family for a moment, because we talked about the various places you've lived. You said your wife, Marilyn, schlepped you back here.
Right.
You met Marilyn in college, I assume.
Yes, it was a blind date.
Really?
Yes, my roommate in medical school was her cousin, and he said, I've got the perfect girl for you. I have to fix you up. She's the BU, so we have to go to Boston from Burlington. There was no problem. He had a car. We had our blind dates. She went home and told her mother that she was going to marry me.
Wow.
And I wrote a letter that night to her telling her what a wonderful time we had and we should do that more often. And so we did.
So love at first sight.
Yes, it was.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you became married before you started practicing in New York?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we did.
That's great.
And the rabbi at our wedding, under the chuppah, said Melvyn and Marilyn, M&M, a mystical marriage. And he was right.
And how many years have you been married?
63.
Wow. Well, congratulations to you and to Marilyn.
Thank you.
So, absolutely. And now you're a pediatrician. You're in Scranton, Pennsylvania, having been schlepped there. Pediatrician raising children. You have a little bit of a head start, I guess, as a pediatrician, but tell me about life as a parent.
Well, life as a parent was also very interesting. First of all, my wife always wanted to work in my office. Even when we first met and talked about future plans and things like that. And I said, fine, no problem. And she said, well, I'll tell you something. You make sure you only take care of the patients. I'll take care of everything else. And she did.
No kidding. And you've had a wonderful partnership ever since.
Yes, indeed. She was the only one in the office helping me, took care of the children, weighed them, measured them, took care of the books, took care of people coming in, took care of some telephone calls. In fact, it got to the point sometimes when a patient would come into the office and say, I don't want to speak to you, doctor. I want to speak to your wife.
She wanted to talk to the boss.
Yeah, right.
That's wonderful.
So it worked out very well. And as a father, oh, I loved it. I loved those 3 kids. And as a husband, I loved my wife. She loved me. She cared an awful lot about me. Still does. Makes you feel wonderful.
It makes me feel wonderful hearing it. So thank you. The kids that you mentioned, you had such a busy practice. And when I mentioned some of your earlier accomplishments, particularly with being chief of pediatrics, the NICU, the Ronald McDonald House, how did you make time for family and making sure that they were the center of your life?
Well, I made sure that Sunday was family day, no matter what, okay? I'm not a golfist, okay? But there are certain things that could take up my time on Sunday, but I made sure that as a family, Sunday was our day, no matter what. We went skiing, we went fishing, we went hiking. We loved the outdoors very much. When they were smaller, we took them to zoos. We took, nature walks and hikes and things like that. And Sunday was the day. I mean, during the week, you paid as much attention as you could. Always kissed and hugged them tonight at bedtime. Mm-hmm. We made sure of. Very important. We fit it all in somehow.
Wow.
It wasn't a task. That's the important thing. Family life shouldn't be a task. It's something that you really feel that you want to do with the family.
That's such a good point. I think in busy lives, as we have today, we sometimes use that as an excuse and we have to check the boxes. We have to get the kids ready for bed. We have to put the kids in bed. We have to. But the
priorities.
What you're saying is
priorities. Family is first.
Yeah. Absolutely. You clearly were an inspiring father figure because your 3 children are also in medicine or healthcare in one way or another, correct?
Michael, our eldest son, is a director of medicine at Allied Services for the Handicapped. He's a physiatrist. He's the eldest, as I said. Yeah. Larry, our second son, is in California. He's employed by the wonderful company. The wonderful company, if you look at your pistachios and Fiji, water and other items of interest that they produce. He happens to be the medical director for that company and takes care of 15,000 employees.
That's a big job.
Yes, it is. And Joy, our daughter, takes care of the Birchwood Fitness Center, is qualified in many spheres of nutrition and applying that to good living and environmental studies fits everything together and gives a planned program to people.
Balancing your life, your family, and your profession through all these years, somehow you found a way to find time for the other side, perhaps, of Dr. Mel Wolk, which is the artistic side. You've been a photographer, a visual artist. You've put together some wonderful work through decades of being out, whether it's in nature with your camera or practicing found object art, I believe it's called.
Right.
Where did you find time for all that?
Once again, you have to make time. I've said family time is priority. You do need a little bit of time for yourself, and that's another priority. My wife is very, very comfortable with that. She encourages it very much. She appreciates what I do, which is nice.
Yeah.
I particularly have always enjoyed high color. Perhaps this sweater signifies that.
Yes.
I love form. I love texture. I love architectural things, either on buildings or pieces that stand alone. I love all the history of artists, the history of their painting, whether it's the Hudson Valley group or whether it's the Impressionists. But I do tend to lead towards the abstract, because that to me is really something that you have to really think hard about interpreting it. And sometimes it's very difficult.
Almost takes on a different meaning depending on...
Yes, it does. And that's what's interesting about found objects. You'll stumble in the flea market or in a junkyard and see something, and something pops into your mind, what you can do with that piece, because it's so figural, and it just blends to something in your mind that you think you can deal with and either improve upon it or make sure you finish what you think is in your mind that it should represent.
So when it comes to inspiration for your art, particularly with found objects, it's the object that gives you the inspiration? It's not something else that you've been thinking about or wanting to create?
Well, sometimes it works both ways. If you see the object, it may stimulate to do something, or if you have something in your mind that you're looking for, that you've been thinking about, and then suddenly you see it. So it works both ways.
Interesting. And the found object part of your art has always been fascinating to me, and our viewers are going to see a few examples of some of Dr. Wolk's art, and I'll ask you about a couple of pieces as our viewers take a look. One in particular that I really enjoyed, it's become a dog, and it has a USA theme.
That was my first piece.
Your first piece ever?
Right.
Wow.
Well, first of all, I love red, white, and blue. I love this country. That goes without saying, and anything with red, white, and blue always fascinates me. But this piece, if you look at it, it really looks like it could pass for some sort of animal. And to me, it passed as a figure of a dog that I found in the junkyard. And it really represents that part of the interior of the car door that regulates your window to go up and down. So I took that piece and then added nuts and bolts and other pieces of form, so to say, and the additional red, white, and blue colors, entitled it Canine America.
Wonderful. And it gives you a feeling of pleasure when you look at it. A lot of your work invokes a happy feeling. Is that intentional, or is that just the
Well,
the
some
product?
of it does. Some of it is peculiar, you might say, and some people don't understand it. Well, you don't have to understand art. You can just look at a piece of so-called art, if you will, okay? And just appreciate its form, its color, the texture of it, what you think it might represent, and you'll get a dozen different opinions on it. And that's what's interesting about this. And some people think it's crazy.
Certainly not. Well, I'm not one of them. Another piece which we'll take a look at, sticking on the red, white, and blue theme, which I was going to ask you, so I'm glad you brought that up, very patriotic, but also incorporating your experience in medicine, is a heart.
Yes.
And also found objects.
Yes. Well, I was in the junkyard, and once again, I looked at the center, the main piece in this art piece, and I recognized it in my mind as a picture of a water pump, which it happened to be a water pump of a Chevrolet truck from the late 30s. And to me, it represented a motor, and what best motor can I think of is the heart. And to me, it represented a heart. And what do you have to run the heart? Well, spark plugs, of course.
Right, sure.
And the vessels are all anatomically correct. There you have a mechanical heart transplant.
That's amazing. And, you mentioned the junkyard. Did you, as a child, have an experience in junkyards?
Yes, I did. With my stepfather, I was employed as the head cutter-up of cars that were junked, so to say. At that time, during the early 50s, we were able to have not only a used car business, a junkyard, but at that time, I had no idea I was going to be dealing with junk parts. But it was my job to cut up the cars with an acetylene torch and prepare them for shipment to, I guess, a higher-up junkyard.
Right.
I had my days of being very, very busy during high school and part of undergrad.
That's a really interesting connection to your childhood in ways because, you're in the junkyard, your acetylene torch, I'm sure, had very bright colors.
Oh, yeah.
And now you've transferred that into art.
As long as you think so.
It's open to the interpretation of the viewer, correct?
Right, absolutely.
Another one of your pieces, switching mediums a little bit, is New York Crunch, which our viewers will see as well. Gives a real multimedia appearance, focusing maybe more on photography and your use of technology.
Well, at times, and at all times, New York is a very busy place. As I said, I like form and figures, and this particular art piece represents a very, very busy New York by using different types of found objects. My wife and I used to go around to different antique places and flea markets, and we sort of started to fall in love with children's toys, early children's toys. So we had some collections of early toys, and I tried to weave the toys into a pattern that people would appreciate as adult. So the use of celluloid baby rattles of the early 20s and 30s are used in this art piece. The use of toy tin cars used in this. Then I took my tie collection and made buildings out of them. There's so much in this frame of small toys like the old pencil sharpeners that used to come in the boxes kids used to take to school. Those are represented by the airplanes in the sky. Those are really Bakelite pencil sharpeners. And then I went to New York one day with my wife, and we went down to Greenwich Village, and I photographed the arch at the bottom of Fifth Avenue there, at the beginning of the village, and just fixed it all up the way I wanted it and showed a crushed New York. I have a companion piece called Crushed Coney Island, also made from old toys and parts.
That's amazing, and I hope our viewers enjoyed that as well. And you've been featured in galleries?
Local galleries, and I was fortunate enough to have a couple of pieces, a couple of years during the early 200s at the New Britain Museum of Fine Arts, which was quite an accomplishment, I felt.
Absolutely.
I was thrilled with it. Yeah. And I continue doing it up till today also. Now that I'm in Scranton and we're very, very cold and train-minded, I'm dealing with trains and Phoebe snow and all the history associated with trains and memorabilia and trolleys.
Sure, waiting to be rediscovered, right? All that history. You and your wife, Marilyn, have been featured also in Pennsylvania Magazine. You've done some features with covered bridges and things like that.
Yes.
You mentioned Marilyn before with working with your practice for many, many years. You have an amazing working relationship. It seems that you always work well together?
Yes, very well.
That's great.
We worked for Pennsylvania Magazine as contributors. She was an English major, and she wrote beautiful articles while I did the photography on certain items that we would find in the state of Pennsylvania. And as I said, she wrote about them, and I did the photography, and we enjoyed the trips. That's wonderful.
That's having a working relationship with your spouse is something we could also talk about probably for another episode. But certainly seems like you've been very successful in doing it.
A happy wife is a happy life.
There you go. Agreed. Dr. Wolk, creating the Illphabet, has this been a dream of yours to create a project like this?
It has been. For several years, I thought about doing something, some sort of a book that would not only entertain the children, but would also entertain the parents if they need to explain different illnesses, different situations to the child. It's important that the book is a health educational type of book. It's a coloring book. It should be able to give children and parents some sort of indication about the different illnesses that children do acquire during their growth, and what to do. So it helps parents as well as children.
You're finding this book in a doctor's office, perhaps, in a school, classroom?
Oh, I think it'd be very important, and I think it'd be a good way to what I've been talking about, really. Certainly the distribution of a book like this in a doctor's office especially, if you will, pass even the time away while you're there, and you may pick up a thing or two, so to say,
sure,
on what's happening in the world of children growing up.
When you created this book, getting into the detail of it, it's not just learning the ABCs, it's also kind of demystifying for young people what it's like to go to the doctor. Where did that idea come from?
Once again, where do ideas come from? Just it came into my head, if you will, that most children early on are afraid to go to the physician. First thing I think of is shots. This book is not only important in going to the doctor, it's trying to ease the going to the doctor, okay? And also teaches children new words associated with going to the doctor. The past few years especially, all they've heard is COVID, and COVID associated with death. There's so much more to medicine and going to the doctor, or listening to the news and watching what's going on in TV, or listening to what your parents are talking about all the time, about especially this serious past few years. It's also important that if the child can't read it properly or color it properly, this is another way parents can associate with their kids. Parents can read to them, go to the child. When the child goes to sleep at night, it might be something like to read to them, or maybe even a little coloring before going to bed. Or when the child is sick, especially when they're sick, and you show them the Illphabet is related to alphabet, okay? Get that association so that it's just a calming type of thing. Associated with animals, like kids love animals. So, I mean, you've got a great mixture of making children comfortable. And that's what we want to do, is make them comfortable. And learning at the same time. If they don't know a certain word, I'm certain that any 5-year-old is looking at this book and sees the word meningitis, can't even maybe pronounce it. Well, it gives a chance for the parent to learn about meningitis. Look it up. Do they still have dictionaries? I'm not sure. But Google it.
Right.
Then explain it to your child. There's other things or other illnesses besides COVID. Let's get back to them, okay?
And you mentioned things in this book, such as simple things like sore throat and fevers, and the connection that children can make that it's okay to go to the doctor's office. It's a good thing for them.
And it's a good thing to have a fever, because fever helps rid of the illness.
Right. And the parent's reaction oftentimes is, oh no.
My God, the child has got 102 or 104. Well, it belongs there because it's helping you get better.
Right. So
and calm the parent.
Right.
Calm the parent, calm the child.
I'm not sure if you're educating the child more or the parent more in this book, but either one is a success, correct?
Right.
And you've done it in such a fun way. It's written in a, as everyone will know, a Seussical style when I say that.
Right. And I thank my wife for helping me very much with the book, especially with the rhyming.
And I think Illphabet, learning the alphabet, we always see the ABCs all the time, the ABCs of this, the 1, 2, 3s, incorporates the alphabet with learning about, man, what can go wrong with your body? And it's okay to be ill, and it's not a bad thing to go to the doctor.
Right.
How did you make that easier on children in your own practice?
Well, you just try and be as calm about illness that they present with and explain to them what's happening, and in a calm manner. Everything depends on calmness. I mean, if you're surrounded by people who are really intense about anything, you're not going to have any calmness. So you have to present yourself as calm. And one of the reasons I do not wear white is I don't want the child. I would rather present myself as a plain human being,
right,
ready to play with them, rather than to examine them.
A trusted father figure, grandfatherly figure, perhaps. At this
Whatever.
point, right? And I think you said calm, and is that a good message for the parents as well? Remain calm?
Very much, very much. Any parent who's listening to me right now knows the feeling of not being calm. So this may teach you a lesson.
And that carries straight through to the child when the parent is
Absolutely.
not calm, correct? You mentioned, actually, in the forward of this book, I believe, I read a note where it said, can make going to the doctor's office fun. Mm-hmm. Can going to the doctor be fun?
Absolutely. My son has a slogan, so to say, okay? Lead with your funny bone, okay?
That's great.
So you have to greet the child, not only in a calm manner, a friendly manner, a playful manner, and this is the way you have to carry out your exam also.
And loving as well, as you mentioned.
Oh,
before.
absolutely.
It's so important. You must have had a love of your career to be, not only to have done it for nearly 40 years, but then to still be thinking about it, working on projects like this all these years later.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. But before I let you go, I have to ask you a question, which I'm sure you're asked all the time, but it's tough these days. Parents will say, because of the world, not only, like you mentioned, COVID, the media, but also things like social media, different anxieties children have now compared to what they had 30 or 40 years ago, or when I grew up or when you grew up. What advice do you have to people these days about raising good kids?
Don't be afraid to say no. Very important. I see too many families, too many children being spoiled, in quotation marks, being spoiled, and whatever they want, they seem to get. They have the ideas that they seem to be able to get away with an awful lot today as compared to years ago. And do not be afraid to say no. It's part of growing up.
And it's often easier for the parents to just say yes, right, and move on.
It's not that difficult. Try it. It works better, especially in future years.
So don't be afraid to say no to your child.
Children growing up.
Yeah.
It's very important.
It's a different world, and those things are important for us all to hear. That it's important to focus on the family, as you mentioned. Don't be afraid to say no.
Right.
And don't overreact when there is an illness.
Don't overreact when you don't have to overreact.
Right. And the worry comes along with that too, I'm sure.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Well, great advice. I want to say it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. We appreciate you've given us not only great insight into pediatrics in the children's book, but also I think some real great life lessons. And on behalf of not only the Northeastern Pennsylvania community, but everyone watching and listening today, I want to say thanks for all you've done.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We've been talking with Dr. Mel Wolk, a passionate children's advocate, visual artist, and author of The Illphabet, an interactive, fun, and educational children's book, making childhood illness and doctor's visits a little less scary. You can find The Illphabet on Amazon and other outlets, and hopefully soon in your child's classroom and healthcare offices. To see more of Dr. Wolk's artistic endeavors, you can Google melwolk.com. And Dr. Wolk, we really appreciate you being with us today. We look forward to your projects well into the future.
Thank you.
Absolutely.